You won't believe the kind of family drama that sometimes hides behind the closed doors of a seemingly normal home, and this one is a story that might shock you, make you angry, or even make you laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. But before I get deep into it, let me remind you to subscribe right now, because this channel brings you real human stories that you won't find anywhere else, and trust me, by the time you reach the end of this one, you'll want to hear more. So, it all started when I was sitting in my study one evening, casually going through some old documents, and through the thin walls of our home, I suddenly overheard my daughter talking on the phone with one of her closest friends. At first, I didn't pay much attention because I assumed it was one of her regular chats about wedding dresses, flower arrangements, or bridesmaids' arguments that every wedding seems to come with. But then I heard her say something that froze me in my tracks, something that made my stomach twist as if someone had punched me right there in the gut. Her exact words were, "Dad is so petty, he refuses to let mom's lover attend my wedding." Now imagine hearing that line out of nowhere, without context, without any preparation, just floating through the air and crashing into your ears like a bomb exploding in your living room. I sat there stunned, my heart racing, my mind instantly flooded with questions. Did she really say lover? Did my daughter mean it literally? Was she exaggerating? Or was there something even darker going on behind my back that I had missed all along? My brain replayed the words over and over again like a broken record, refusing to let me move past them, and suddenly every memory of the past year started to line up in my head like puzzle pieces demanding to be connected. There had been times when my wife came home late, brushing off my questions with vague excuses about errands or work meetings, and there had been evenings when she seemed unusually dressed up for just dinner with the girls. I had pushed those suspicions deep down, telling myself I was imagining things, telling myself I was paranoid, but now, hearing my daughter casually confirm it in her conversation, it felt like someone had ripped the blindfold off and forced me to see reality in all its cruel detail. But even then, I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I kept listening, my ears straining to catch every word. My daughter, bless her heart, sounded torn, frustrated, almost as if she was caught between loyalty to her mother and love for me, and that broke me in a way I can't even describe. It's one thing to be betrayed as a husband, but it's another to have your child stuck in the middle of that betrayal, forced to navigate a battlefield where she never asked to be a soldier. The idea that my wife's so-called lover was even considered as a guest at my daughter's wedding made my blood boil. Weddings are sacred moments, filled with family, unity, and blessings, and yet here was this man, this stranger who had slithered his way into my marriage, lurking like a shadow in the background of what should have been one of the most beautiful days of our lives. The anger bubbled in me, but beneath that anger was a deep sadness, a kind of grief that comes not from losing someone to death, but from realizing they were never really yours to begin with. And as I sat there, my fists clenched, my breathing uneven, I knew this wasn't just about being petty or stubborn, as my daughter had accused me of being. This was about drawing a line, about deciding once and for all what kind of man I wanted to be in this story. Would I silently allow another man, my wife's lover, to walk into the church, shake hands with my family, and smile for photos as if he belonged there, while every fiber of my being screamed that he was the very reason my marriage had turned into ashes? Or would I stand up for myself, even if it meant being called petty, even if it meant disappointing my daughter? These were the questions running through my head, questions that would not let me sleep that night, questions that would shape the decisions I made in the days that followed, decisions that would either repair my broken dignity or break my family further apart. The next morning, I woke up with a storm inside my chest, my mind still replaying that one overheard sentence again and again, refusing to loosen its grip. I went downstairs, made myself a cup of coffee, but even as I stirred in the sugar and tried to focus on the simple ritual of sipping the steaming liquid, my thoughts wouldn't settle. I kept asking myself, should I confront my daughter? Should I confront my wife? Or should I sit silently and gather more proof before saying anything, because sometimes silence is more powerful than words, and in silence, people reveal themselves? My daughter walked into the kitchen, bright-eyed, smiling, holding her wedding planner in her hands, and she started chatting about floral arrangements, the cake tasting scheduled for later that week, and how she was struggling to decide on the final seating chart. I watched her closely, every gesture, every laugh, trying to figure out if she had meant what I had overheard, or if it was just some exaggerated phrase tossed into casual conversation with a friend. My heart ached because she looked so innocent, so excited about her big day, and the last thing I wanted was to burden her with the ugly truth of what was going on between her mother and me. But then she said something that almost confirmed my worst fears. She asked, almost hesitantly, "Dad, you're still okay with all the guests on my list, right? I mean, I don't want any unnecessary drama at the wedding." I froze. My mind screamed at me to stay calm, but my pulse gave me away as my hands trembled slightly. I managed to force a half smile and said, "We'll talk about the guest list later. I want to look at it carefully." She nodded innocently, not realizing how much weight her words had just dropped on me. Later that day, when I was alone again, I opened the laptop and searched through the digital guest list she had shared with both me and her mother. I scrolled through name after name, seeing familiar relatives, family friends, her college roommates, her coworkers, and then, near the bottom, I saw a name that stood out like poison dripping into clear water. A man I barely recognized, but whose name I had heard in whispers, in rumors, in fragments of overheard conversations between my wife and her so-called girlfriends. It was him. The so-called family friend who had suddenly appeared in our lives a year ago, the man who had conveniently offered to help my wife with her work events, the man whose number popped up too often on her phone. My chest tightened, my jaw clenched, and it all suddenly made sense. He wasn't just a guest. He was her lover. And my daughter, whether knowingly or unknowingly, had put him on her wedding guest list as though he was some ordinary family acquaintance. The rage inside me threatened to explode, but I forced myself to think. If I went in guns blazing, screaming at everyone, I'd only create chaos. My daughter would see me as the unreasonable parent, the petty father trying to control her wedding. But if I kept quiet, that man would show up on the most important day of my daughter's life, standing there smugly as if he had a right to share the same space as me, the betrayed husband, the father of the bride. That was something I could not allow. The word petty that my daughter had casually used now echoed differently in my ears. Was I being petty for protecting my dignity? Or was I simply refusing to let betrayal be normalized, refusing to let my wife's choices bleed into my daughter's happiest moment? I paced the room, wrestling with my thoughts. I remembered how I had always been the one to shield my daughter from pain, from the ugliness of life, always the one to carry burdens silently so she could smile freely. And yet now, the situation was so twisted that she thought I was the problem, when in reality I was the only one standing between her joy and the shadow of betrayal that threatened to taint it. The weight of it crushed me, but deep down, a fire was building. I wasn't going to let my daughter walk down the aisle under the mocking eyes of the man who had destroyed her parents' marriage. I wasn't going to let my wife rewrite reality by pretending her friend belonged in our family celebration. No matter what anyone thought of me, no matter if my daughter cried, no matter if the whole family called me petty, I knew I had to put my foot down. But the question that haunted me was, how? How do you tell your daughter that her mother's secret lover cannot attend her wedding without shattering her image of her family? How do you protect her happiness while protecting your own dignity? Those questions would keep me awake for nights, as the clock ticked closer and closer to the wedding day, and the truth loomed larger, demanding to be confronted. That night I couldn't sleep, no matter how much I tried to push the thoughts away, no matter how many times I told myself to let it go for the sake of peace. My mind refused to rest. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while the shadows of the night played tricks on the walls, and beside me, my wife slept peacefully, or at least pretended to, her breathing steady, her face turned slightly away from me as though she had long ago decided that even in her sleep she didn't want to face me. I studied her profile in the dim light, remembering the woman I had fallen in love with decades ago, the one whose laughter used to light up rooms, whose eyes used to meet mine with warmth and unspoken promises, and I wondered when exactly that woman had disappeared, replaced by this stranger lying next to me. Did she know I had overheard my daughter? Did she realize that her little secret wasn't so secret anymore? Or was she so confident, so sure of her hold over the narrative, that she didn't even care what I thought? My mind tossed and turned with anger, sadness, and a sense of humiliation that felt unbearable. I thought of confronting her right then and there, shaking her awake and demanding the truth, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the thought of my daughter's wedding being just weeks away, maybe it was the fear that if I exploded too soon, everything would spiral into chaos, and my daughter's happiness would be destroyed before it even had a chance to bloom. So I swallowed it, burying my rage deep inside, promising myself I would pick the right moment, the moment where the truth could no longer be hidden. The following days were torture. Every time my wife picked up her phone and stepped outside to take a call, every time she left the house in a dress that was too carefully chosen, every time she smiled a little too brightly when texting, I felt the knife twist deeper. And yet, I stayed silent, all the while watching, listening, observing like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the inevitable push. My daughter, meanwhile, continued her excited wedding preparations, bouncing between her mother and me, not realizing how much of a minefield she was dragging us across. She would come into the living room, spread out color samples, ask for opinions on decorations, chatter about photographers, and I would smile, nod, and pretend as though everything was fine, even as my insides were screaming. It's a strange thing, to love your child so deeply that you willingly carry pain just to protect her joy. She deserved her wedding day to be perfect, and I was willing to bleed quietly behind the curtain if that's what it took. But I knew there was a line, a boundary, and the presence of that man, her mother's lover, at the wedding was that line. I could not, would not, allow it. The week of the wedding arrived, and with it came a whirlwind of activity that masked the tension brewing underneath. Relatives poured into town, suitcases filled with colorful dresses and neatly folded suits, chatter filled the house, laughter bounced off the walls, and in the middle of it all my daughter glowed like the brightest star. She was radiant, nervous yet excited, her joy so pure that for moments I almost forgot the storm that was waiting to erupt. But every time I saw my wife sneak away to check her phone, every time her lips curled into a small private smile when she read a message, I was reminded that this wedding wasn't just about uniting two souls, it had also become a battlefield where my dignity and her betrayal clashed silently. The day before the wedding, I overheard her whispering in the corner of the living room. Her voice was soft but I caught fragments. Yes, everything is ready, of course you'll be there, don't worry, he won't do anything dramatic. My chest tightened. She was talking to him. Confirming his presence. Assuring him that I wouldn't stand in his way. That was the final straw. My blood boiled but instead of exploding, a cold calmness washed over me. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The morning of the wedding, the house was buzzing with energy. Bridesmaids rushed about with curling irons and makeup brushes, the kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread and coffee, laughter mixed with last-minute panicked instructions. My daughter hugged me tightly before heading off to the bridal suite at the venue, her eyes sparkling with gratitude, telling me how much it meant to her that I was there, how she couldn't have done this without me. That hug nearly broke me. Because inside I was bracing for a confrontation that could change how she saw me forever. But I reminded myself again, sometimes love isn't about making your child happy in the moment, but about protecting them from shadows they don't yet fully see. At the venue, I stood tall in my suit, greeting guests, shaking hands, smiling politely, but my eyes were scanning constantly, waiting for him. And then, as if the universe wanted to test me, I saw him. Walking through the doors, wearing a smug little smile, his hand casually tucked into his pocket like he owned the place. My wife trailed just a few steps behind, trying to act natural, introducing him as an old friend to relatives who looked confused but smiled politely anyway. Rage bubbled inside me but my rehearsed calmness held me steady. I walked straight toward him, my steps firm, my shoulders squared. He saw me and for a split second, his smile faltered. Maybe he realized that this wasn't going to be as easy as my wife had promised him. I stopped in front of him, looked him dead in the eyes, and with a calm voice that carried more weight than shouting ever could, I said, "You will not attend this wedding. Turn around, and leave. Now." There was silence. People nearby paused, sensing the tension. My wife's face went pale, her lips parting as if to object, but I raised my hand slightly, silencing her before she could twist the narrative. The man chuckled nervously, trying to play it off, saying something like, "Come on, no need to make a scene. I'm just here as a friend," but I cut him off. My voice stayed calm, but sharper this time, carrying the authority of a father protecting his family. "This is my daughter's wedding. I am her father. And you will not disrespect this day by stepping foot inside. If you have any dignity left, you'll leave before I make you." The room went tense. For a moment, I thought he might resist, thought he might push back, but then he glanced around and realized all eyes were on him, that he was the intruder in a space that was not his. His smile cracked, and with a bitter look, he muttered something under his breath and walked out, his footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. My wife's face flushed with anger and humiliation, and she hissed at me through clenched teeth, "You've ruined everything." But I stood tall, unshaken, my eyes fixed ahead as though her words were dust blowing in the wind. I knew the truth, I hadn't ruined anything. I had protected everything that mattered. The ceremony began shortly after, and as my daughter walked down the aisle in her beautiful white gown, her eyes brimming with tears of joy, my heart swelled with pride. In that moment, none of the drama mattered. Not the betrayal, not the whispers, not the confrontation at the door. All that mattered was that my daughter was radiant, stepping into a new chapter of her life, and I was there to walk beside her. She smiled at me, a smile that told me she was happy, that she felt safe, that she knew I was the anchor she could always lean on. And I realized then that standing up for myself hadn't just been about me, it had been about her too. Because one day she would look back on her wedding and remember not the tension, but the strength of a father who protected her day from being tainted by deceit. After the vows, after the rings, after the cheers and applause, the reception began. Music filled the air, glasses clinked, laughter bubbled, and my daughter danced with her husband under the warm glow of lights. My wife sat at a table across the room, her face tight, her eyes avoiding mine. For the first time, I didn't feel hurt by it. I felt free. I had drawn the line, I had reclaimed my dignity, and I had refused to be painted as petty when the truth was, I had been strong. My daughter, oblivious to the deeper war that had been fought behind the scenes, hugged me at the end of the night and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Dad. You made this day perfect." Those words were worth more than anything else. Later, as I stood outside the venue watching the newlyweds drive away into their future, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and peace. Sorrow because I knew my marriage was broken beyond repair, peace because I had finally chosen myself, chosen dignity, chosen truth. Life doesn't always give us happy endings, but sometimes it gives us clarity, and clarity is more valuable than the prettiest illusion. My daughter would one day learn the truth, maybe years from now, maybe sooner, and when she did, she would understand why I made the choices I made. She would see that I wasn't petty, I was a father who refused to let betrayal dance freely on his child's happiest day. And so, that's how the story ended. Not with rage, not with chaos, but with quiet strength. My wife's lover never made it past the door. My daughter's wedding remained pure, untouched by shadows. And me? I walked away with my head held high, knowing that sometimes being called petty is just another way of being called principled. Remember, life will test your boundaries, people will twist your choices, but at the end of the day, it's not about what they call you, it's about who you decide to be. If you connected with this story, if you felt the emotions, the pain, and the strength in it, don't forget to subscribe, because here, we tell stories that show the raw truth of human life, stories that might just remind you of your own strength when you need it most.